Well, it's good to see you. You can see I've been reborn in a new guise. The URBED Trust. I have a feeling if you Googled it, you wouldn't find anything yet because we're in the throes of applying for charitable status. But the idea, we've been sort of trying to do good for 40 years, but we thought we might formalize it by setting up an independent body with trustees with charitable status, which would be concerned with disseminating the sort of gospel according to URBED, if you like, and also doing some archiving work, and it will be running some projects. And it provides a vehicle for my particular interest, which is transferring the lessons from Britain and Europe, that's it's mainly what not to do, to growing cities in India. So anyway, that's enough about the URBED Trust. And I've been asked to speak about the subject of linking transport with development. I think this is a historic conference because we're trying to cross a divide. Oh gosh, why is it suddenly gone forward? There we are. Because we're trying to cross a divide which makes it very difficult to get... Do you know why... How do I stop it automatically moving on, or is there no way? Oh. Because we're terribly blinkered, we're short-sighted, but we also work in silos. And when one looks across to the continent of Europe, one is impressed by how they get on with things and do things at half the cost. So I've spent a lot of time trying to learn from different cities in Europe, to a great extent thanks to Alan Stone's wonderful tours, and also through the guided tours I've run myself. And if any one of you is interested in the book of the film, if you like, it's called Good Cities, Better Lives, and it was Peter Hall's last book, and I did a fair amount of the work on it. This diagram, some of you may recognize because it came out of the submission that won the Wolfson Economics Prize, and it showed how one could grow Oxford in ways that could double Oxford in size by making the most of existing infrastructure, but also using the land value uplift from developing in the land around Oxford to fund what we call the Oxford Metro. I've focused a lot on Oxford. Partly because I think it's a classic example of a missed opportunity for growth, but also because I think the same situation applies to a number of other cities. So I'm going to say something about the challenges, and then I'm going to give you some images or lessons from some exemplary European cities. So, but the first point is, as we all know, we need to develop much more, twice as much well-designed and affordable new housing. We've got to tackle congestion. It won't be solved just by building roads. We've got to link the town and the country better, and I think rethink the green belt. David Rudlin says, as you get older, you need to flex your belts. Well, I'm suggesting we actually need what I would call a green web, but that's a different story. And creating enough well-paid jobs, because we can't exist on Starbucks or McDonald's wages alone. And our research, which was particularly focused on creating the Cambridgeshire Quality Charter for Growth, where, as well as taking people from Cambridge to different parts of this country, we took them to Freiburg and to Dutch new settlements to draw out some lessons. And in putting this presentation together, I've particularly drawn on a few examples which are basically cities that have been considered for or recognized as great cities by the Academy of Urbanism. So it's not a totally arbitrary collection of places I've chosen. So I've chosen 4 cities plus Grenoble, which deserves to be included. So are there some simple steps? Well, I think the first simple step or principle is we have to reclaim city centres from cars. And we're better than Copenhagen, and we've already recognized, I think, that it's one of the nicest cities, the happiest place, best place to live. And Jan Gehl famously said, a good city is like a good party. So in other words, it's about making people feel comfortable and welcome. And the city, Copenhagen, used this famous finger plan to shape its growth. It developed along transport corridors, and as a result, it's kept traffic out of the centre, which means that cycling is safe and fun. They've taken away 3% of parking spaces a year. It was about that. Enough to make a difference over time, but not enough to be noticeable. And now something like a third of trips are by bike. And in case you think the sun always shines, I can tell you the weather is just as bad in Copenhagen as in much of England. And Sturgit, the main shopping street, stretches for a mile across the city. So it goes from around the station, through the centre, and out to Nyhavn, which I showed in my first slide. So if we want to learn how to reclaim the centre from cars, let's at least look at Copenhagen. And most recently, they funded the urban extension at URBED, which not everyone likes, but the fact is it's been built quite promptly, and it's funded through land value uplift. They've captured the value, and they built the first of their metro lines out of it. So if you want to understand how to fund what we should be doing about funding infrastructure, particularly local infrastructure, go to Copenhagen. The second thing is to adopt spatial growth plans. And here I'm going to take you to the Netherlands, and I'm going to show one of many images of Phoenix suburbs. Phoenix is in Dutch it's an unpronounceable set of words, but basically it was a plan to increase the housing stock by about 8% over 10 years by building effectively sustainable urban extensions. 100 of these have been built, 100. If you multiply the population of the Netherlands to make it equivalent to Britain, it would come to 400. So when we talk about how wonderful it is that we've, built, or are building Vista Eco-Town, which is shouldn't be called an eco-town, we just think that our performance so far is pathetic in comparison with the Netherlands, which has very similar circumstances. Most of these are around 2,000 homes, a few as large as 10,000 in Vathorst, which I'll mention. And in thinking about what really got development going, how did you change an image? I thought where better than to take Rotterdam, which was very much an industrial working class city. The port moved downstream. And how did Rotterdam compete with places like Amsterdam or Utrecht? And the answer is they started with contemporary design, a famous scheme of these cube houses, which I believe, if you're a musician, it's very good for rehearsing, because you don't annoy the neighbours. But I think when they went to connect up the two sides of the river, they spent more than the minimum needed to create this iconic Erasmus Bridge, because they saw it as important to change the image of Kop van Zuid, which was a rundown part of Rotterdam. And this is an example of one of the new suburbs, if you like, in Kop van Zuid. It's now stylish and balanced court, and there's been a great stress in Holland, not as we would do, just in getting rich people to live in the place of poor people, but to create balanced communities. And the stations can be catalysts for change, and Rotterdam has already been mentioned, the idea of having a concert hall, if you like, as part of your new station, and that's if you like, a terribly symbolic picture of the new Rotterdam. But if you go along the line to Amersfoort, which is to the north of Utrecht, you'll see how they've developed their railway station. I always take people there because it's a marvellous example where they put the station facilities over the tracks and then developed alongside. Offices on one side, housing on the other. So obvious. And yet even when we do Reading Station at a cost of, 600 million, we don't seem to be able to integrate development with the upgrading of the railway. The third thing, the mantra of the European Union, is to keep cities compact. By the way, I realise I'm talking about Europe, and you'll be saying it's all irrelevant now. Well, whether we leave this European Union or not, we are still part of the continent of Europe. And so I think it does still make sense to draw lessons from Europe and not just the United States. And the basic principle of Freiburg was that it's a city of short distances, and therefore it kept the city compact by extending at the edges, rather than as would have happened if the market had dominated and everyone would have moved out to little villages further away from the city and driven to work. And this plan for Vauban is wonderful because on one piece of paper all the rules necessary to develop Vauban, an extension of, 3,000 homes, are written. We would have produced 10 telephone directories worth of guides. And I just think it's lovely that it's not only the city is compact, but the principles are quite simple and straightforward. And people who go to Freiburg, how many people have gone to Freiburg? Hands up. Right, so a significant number. If you go into the church there, you will see that the whole of the city centre, the whole of the historic centre was bombed in 1945, a completely vindictive, unnecessary act of bombing because there was absolutely nothing of any military significance there. But the whole historic city centre has been rebuilt, so you wouldn't really know that it wasn't always there. And the dense urban extensions reduce sprawl, so that you're partly reducing the need to travel by people living close to their work. And what's happened is there's been a policy of building tram lines out from the tram system, in the case of Regeneration before it started, in the case of Verban after it started, to make the city of short distances. And I think you might like to look at these figures, because they show how over a period of, 30 years or so, car use went from the majority of trips, 60%, to being a third of trips. And I believe that for cities like York or Oxford or Colchester, that should be the sort of mix we're looking for. Obviously, in London, the proportion by public transport and walking will be very much higher. I imagine it's 80% or something. Perhaps it's high. It will be more in inner London, but perhaps averaging around 75%. So Freiburg shows how to tame the car by producing a first-class public transport system, by making it easy and safe to cycle, and also making it expensive to park. Of course, you can't do any of this without providing municipal leadership. It's ridiculous that we are trying to run a country as we perhaps would have done in 1900, everything decided at the centre, when you need some degree of local autonomy. I might say it's not that the mayors of French cities have total power. They still have to persuade people. The mayor of Lille had to persuade 83 communes to collaborate when he went for building a new station on the high-speed line at Lille rather than Amiens. He had to persuade the surrounding communes that they would benefit through what was called the Metropolitan Compromise, whereby the old tram line was upgraded and a new driverless metro was built. Now, this is a dynamic mayor I met recently in Montpellier. He's Sorel. He took over from Georges Frêche, who is famous for being a sort of Stalinist. He wanted to, when somebody queried, I think, he's building a statue of Lenin, he said if they argued he was going to build a statue to Stalin as well, because he believed in driving things forward. And like many French mayors, he was also, I think, a Prime Minister of France for a time, and there was a close link between the government and the cities. And this is the plan for growing Montpellier, the fastest growing city in France. It's right down in the southwest, if you wonder where it is. It's not far from Nîmes and Marseille, and a simple sort of concept of extending Montpellier down to the sea, using, of course, trams everywhere, and the city acquired low-value land. How did it do it? It basically made sure that all the crappy land, this was land used for growing rather poor stuff that made poor wine, they acquired that. They started by acquiring the barracks to build this thing called Antigone, but Port Marianne is basically on land the city acquired. And that meant that they could benefit from the land value uplift and plough it back into the growth of the city. But they also benefit from what's called the versement transport, which means that they can persuade employers to contribute a proportion of their payroll. That's employers employing more than 10%. And so there is a significant funding. And I think that model of getting employers, big employers who benefit from improved transport, to contribute part of the money and having to persuade them that it's a good thing would be an obvious way forward. And the tram network, which you can see has these amazing facades. What's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, they're coloured in many delightful ways. So they've connected the historic city with the sea. And it's not just fast growing in terms of population, it's one of the technopoles in France. You've got a lot of the high-tech businesses. And the city development company, the ZAC, the Zone d'Aménagement Concerté, was the body that procured mixed-use development around these key sites. So the ZAC has the power of compulsorily acquiring the land if required. It draws up, it's got the staff, 100 staff I think, in Montpellier, to draw up briefs about what the city wants. You can see them looking at options for the site, and then they make sure they get the right developers building the houses or whatever else it's required. And that's just by the railway station. And the final point is to secure smarter growth. And I use this term rather than smart growth. I think we need to go beyond the simplistic ideas of transit-oriented development to being able to link good jobs and homes and infrastructure. So I hope in time I will see people using this term smarter growth. And just to give you a feeling, because some of you may not know France that well, you will see that most of the high-tech businesses, if you like, are down in the south west of France. I must say, when I saw this picture, I've always thought Lyon was sort of in the middle, and the reality is it's down towards the south. And that's the equivalent, if you like, of our southeast. And obviously it has much more sun, and it's near the sea, and that's where people like to live and work. But Toulouse, with the building aircraft, is even more successful. Now, if you go to Lyon, the hub, if you like, of the system, it's not one form of transport, it's every imaginable form of transport. I've gone on a trolley bus going, is there a picture of a trolley bus there? I'm not sure there is. But anyway, there's a trolley bus route going from one side to the other. They've got metros and trams, and also they've got the local rapid transit on the main railway, or what I would call Swift Rail. So it's very important we tend to be totally dedicated to one thing or other. Some people are cyclists, or some people are in favour of trams. In my view, you need all these things to be integrated, as John, I think, was saying. Now, I'm going to finish with just Grenoble. We've drawn on Grenoble in work we're doing in Oxford, because it's a twin city. It was the first city in France to introduce a tram. I might say, or reintroduce a tram. I might say 30 years ago, there were about the same amount of route miles of trams in Britain as in France, and now there's a wonderful graph I've got somewhere which shows how they've leapt ahead. So every French city basically has a tramway. They started connecting the station and the city centre, which of course meant you could get the vehicles out of the city, which means you can give the city over to people so that they can sit and enjoy having a drink out and so on. So it's just such common sense, and it's so tragic that if you go to somewhere, I don't know, Bristol, as George is here, that you cannot see the same extent of a city centre where you can wander freely because they've got trams running through the centre, not guided buses. So, finally, what the lessons are that great historic cities need to offer more. They need to, more in terms of character, enhance the fine buildings and places. They've got to address social differences. They've got to tame the car, integrate town and country, and generate innovation and jobs. 5 C's. 5 things that are easy to remember, hopefully. Now, in Oxford, we showed, having got shortlisted, how one could double Oxford in size by growing on the edge of the city, using land that wasn't in the floodplain or natural of natural beauty. We showed how one could get the required amount of homes in different places, and we've sought to promote a development in one particular part near Barton Park. We particularly focused on showing how Oxford could go to the north around Kidlington, and we very much drew on work with John Rowland, who's part of our team, urban design group member, and more recently with Roger Evans, because we've been looking at how to make this Oxford Metro concept real. Now, we've called it the Metro, I called it the Metro, because it's a whole series of different modes. It's like Lyon, if you like. Starting, line 1 is urban rail and what are called Swift Rail, running fast accelerating and fast braking trains, stopping at a number of points, the existing stations between Bicester and Didcot, but also new stations. Culham, where the Science Centre is, I think has 2 trains a day. It has a beautiful Grinnell station, but no trains. With improved signalling and electrification, which should happen by 2024, that at least could happen. And the line can also be reopened. It's freight only to Cowley, and one can get the poor people who live on the edge of Oxford, Blackburn, Leeds and so on, to be able to get on the train and get into the centre of Oxford and get jobs at the new Westfield, which is opening next year, I think. And that's so simple. I mean, of course, in Britain it's incredibly complicated, but there the line exists, and there's the commitment to upgrade the line. The second line is a SOP to the people who like bus rapid transit, and that's to run that on the line, the route from Whitney through to Abingdon. Why bus rapid transit? Why not rail? Well, because it's too far. Whitney is too far from Oxford to make it economically viable to have a tram link on the old railway line, much as one would like to see it. And the third or fourth lines are the tram lines, starting with Botley and the Botley interchange. Why there? Because it's the shortest distance. It's only, 4 miles from one end to the other, I think. It goes past the new shopping centre, which is going to create havoc if they depend on buses alone. It will go by Oxford Brookes and by the Radcliffe Hospital complex, and we'll come out to new housing on the edge, starting with Barton Park, which I've worked on, but then extension into the Greenbelt. I find it amazing. There are real barriers I believe, in life, mountains and rivers, and perhaps railway lines, and there are artificial boundaries, like local authority boundaries and the Greenbelt. And I think we might start by looking at these artificial boundaries and say, well, do we really need them? So, I'm almost at the end. This is work in progress. Christian Bocci will know this. It came out of, it's just a sketch on the way to developing a strategy for how to develop the area around the station. This was done on a pro bono basis by a team of urban designers linked to the Academy of Urbanism, and this is either up on our website or will be shortly. So, I hope I haven't gone too fast, and I hope I've left some time for questions, which I think was your hope. Or are the questions coming at the end? What? Now. At the end of all sessions. Okay, we'll store up your questions. But I just want to make the point that there are a whole series of places we suggested which had this potential for growth. This map was political dynamite. The day after we won the Wolfson Report, a man who's the minister, supposedly for housing, called Brandon Lewis, rubbished the report on the advice of his political advisors, because apparently these are largely marginal constituencies and the Tories will be up in arms. Perhaps now that the Tories seem to be the government for the next few years, they will have a little bit more courage to look at the places with the potential for growth, like Chelmsford and Colchester and so on, which could benefit from sustainable urban extensions of the kind we proposed for Oxford, but also an upgrading of the transit systems at the same time. And in my view, this is what creates a quality deal. In other words, you don't just say housing is good for you, or we should be saving the planet, or whatever. You say, look, you are concerned, are you not, in Oxford with congestion? Yes, that's our number one problem. And you're concerned with flooding. Oh yes, flooding is a big issue. If we build in the right places, we can finance through the land value uplift the building of new country parks with lots of trees, like Mr. Gray was saying, to hold the water before it floods into the centre of Oxford, and with lakes which can be dug out, which could perhaps be emptied from time to time. And so you create a new recreational amenity, a place where the kids can enjoy and the birds can sing, instead of the arid grasslands we have around Oxford at the moment. And then we can create places where people can have a healthy lifestyle with the easy range of where most of them are walking. Now, exactly the same ideas have been tested out in Colchester. And this is where Tim Farrer is going to tell you a story. I don't think it's reached the end yet, but it's not necessarily all good news. And he, I hope, will bring out the failings in the system and what we need to change in order to build the kind of places that any civilized country would want to live in. Thank you.